A back-to-work Thursday here on Birds 365 with Mac and Mac, joined by John Stolnis, Bleeding Green Nation, Eye on the Enemy podcast. John, I saw you jumped on a couple minutes early. You might have heard the end of the conversation John and I were having. We were in the hypothetical pool of what could happen, losing coaches, blah, blah, blah. I want to jump back into the reality pool with you. Okay. Then we'll take you for a different hypothetical pool too. Okay. But reality first. A word that has been thrown out forever, talking about teams, and not as much about this team as maybe I think there should be. What is the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles identity? What would you call the identity of this year's football team?
Confusion. I mean, I know you're looking for an X's and O's answer because in previous years it would have been, it's kind of funny. It's been a tale of two identities, I think, this season. I would have said through the first half of the year, bullying. Right, they were the bullies. They figured out a way early in the season. They were bullying people with their lines, offensive line, defensive line. Were both playing at an elite level. They were running the ball well. They're having a lot of success in the passing game. The defense was shaky at times, but the defensive line generally you could count on to take over and dominate an opponent's offensive line. Over these last 7 weeks, I think that's been the problem, is that they don't have an identity. I think confusion and uncertainty have been this team's identity. They don't really know what to do on defense at all. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that. But even offensively, I look at the clutch situations late in games where it doesn't seem like they know what plays to call, how to approach different situations, whether to be aggressive, whether to be conservative. And I think the self-doubt that has come into this team over the last 6 weeks has manifested itself in its inability to close out some of these games at the end, like in Seattle against Arizona, when they've had a chance to win a couple of these games, even when they haven't played that well. So it's the identity has shifted as this team has gone along. And if that's the case, then it really doesn't have an identity. And I guess that's the overall point.
Yeah, I like your description of self-doubt because that creeps into your head. You mentioned, I wonder where we'd be, John, if they won those two games, Seattle and Arizona, which they had a chance. You get one stop in each, you win the game. And all of a sudden, they're not really impressive wins.
Right.
I'm not even counting the Giants because they didn't show up for that game. So if you even just win those two games, I think the whole landscape changes. Not that anybody's saying they're going to beat San Francisco or even Dallas if they have to go to Dallas, but I don't think you have this tremendous, this is a disaster feeling. You get that from that sense?
I do, and I think amongst the fan base we'd feel that way. But here's the thing about this 23 season that confounds me the most. I keep going back to this quote that Jeff McClain had a couple of weeks ago in his podcast, where he talked about the Eagles being the most miserable 10-1 team in NFL history. I can't wrap my mind around that. Like, I understand that the fan base and analysts, we're looking at all this different kind of stuff, and we're saying that this team isn't playing like a 10-1 team, but as a locker room, as players, you know how hard it is to win games in the NFL, especially against the level of competition they were doing it against. So while there are things to work on and clean up and all of that, I don't understand how at 10-1 you can be that miserable. I think if that was the case when times were quote unquote good this year, then when those two losses against the 49ers and Cowboys happened, it must have just completely decimated the locker room. And certainly those losses against the Seahawks, where they had a chance to win late, maybe get a little bit on the right side of things emotionally, could have helped. But I wonder how much even that could have helped because of how miserable it said the team was at 10-1. And until somebody can pinpoint to me exactly why that was the case, where was that coming from? Is that coming from the head coach? Is that coming from the perfectionism of the quarterback? Is that coming from the coaching staff not communicating with? That's the big question of this season and why things have fallen apart. I think it goes back before the 49ers loss. I want to know why the team was that way.
Nick started thinking about changing the defensive coordinator when they were 8-1. When they were 8-1. Now, when you talk about, and Jeff's completely right, it was about the expectations. Jody
Yeah.
and I have been talking about it since day one. They can talk all they want about, oh, we don't listen to that stuff. Oh, it seeps in.
Yeah.
And they heard it and they were like, we're not playing, we're winning, but we're not playing like we're supposed to. And you heard it from Jalen Hurts 100 times. And he said, what's the standard versus winning? And he brought that up a couple times.
Yeah.
Things went off the rails. Yeah, it weighed on them. And then when things started going south, the surprise to me is they haven't been able to correct it at least somewhat. Again, not to compete with San Francisco or maybe some of the other teams, but at least correct it against the poorer teams on the schedule. I never saw that coming.
Yeah.
And that to me points back to the biggest mistake of the season, and that's Sean Desai.
Mm-hmm.
Not by any stretch of the imagination am I saying he's great or he did a great job, but I think that showed panic. Like, why are you even thinking about changing the defensive goal? Why is that even creeping into your mind when you're 8-1?
Well, not being in the locker room, I can't speak with any authority to this, but the reporting by a number of the beat writers, and Tim McManus is one who I think has reported this, is that the Eagles' defensive players were unhappy with Sean Desai, that his scheme was too confusing. It was really hard to unpack.
Too confusing.
And we will remember, and this happened the same week that the announcement that they were moving to Matt Patricia came out, that week leading up to Seattle. Remember Kevin Byard coming out and saying that the secondary had taken it upon themselves to do the scouting for themselves that week leading up to Seattle, which to me indicated they'd lost confidence in Sean Desai. And under Sean Desai, they had some good moments for sure, but when you watch the defense, some of the things that they were doing didn't make any sense at all. They were dead last on third down defense. They were, I think, 30th in red zone defense. There were major issues, and apparently the defensive locker room was having a real hard time with Sean Desai. So when it happened, I thought, okay, they must know what they're doing. They must feel like Matt Patricia has an answer here. And clearly they would have been better off staying.
And by the way, and
yes.
I assume it's out there, but by the way, they took away third down autonomy from Sean Desai at 8-1 when they were 8-1. So they took away third down autonomy before they took away the defensive play calling. So it had been in the works for weeks. Kevin Byard,
just let me add to that, John, your point. They're the worst third down defense in the NFL. In the second half of the season, it's not even close. Yeah. So to take it away from the site and then get the results that you get, the worst defense in the National Football League. Yeah, sorry, Nick. That was a flub. You screwed that. You screwed the pooch on that one.
But I go back to when the first year, Nick's first year. If you remember, Fletcher was not happy with the scheme change. Fletcher Cox, early in that season, 2-5. And look, he came from Jim Schwartz, where it was just go get the quarterback, and on the way to the quarterback, stop the run, basically.
Yeah.
And that's fun for a defensive lineman. And playing 4-eye and playing 1.5 gaps, sometimes 2 gaps, isn't as fun. So I think, and I still go back to Nick. Yeah, some guys weren't happy with Sean Desai. The scheme is too complicated. It was too complicated when Jonathan was here. It's too complicated when Vic runs it. It's too complicated. That's the whole freaking problem with it.
Yeah,
is you have these young defensive backs who don't know what the hell they're doing. But I mean, if that's what you want, you got to let a guy grow in a position. You got to let the guy grow you can't say, oh, Kevin Byard, who's been here for a day and a half, is complaining about how complicated Vic Fangio's scheme is, by the way. Yeah, I mean, you got to let him grow. And I think that the change from, and it got worse, as Jody points out, I think it's proven already. Hindsight says they made a mistake. And I don't know if they can recover from it, John.
Well, right now it looks as if when they demoted Sean Desai, they decided to go out and recruit the best high school coaching staff they could find and put them in charge of the defense, because there's just the amount of confusion and chickens running around with their heads cut off on defense before the snap. I mean, there's guys who don't have their mouthpieces in when the ball's being snapped. 4 guys chasing 1 guy in motion. I mean, there's just it's an utter catastrophe what's going on defense right now. And I don't know how they fix it. I don't know how they simplify it. I mean, I don't, if I'm Nick Sirianni, I'm going back to Sean Desai, or I'm just trying something totally simple and just saying, all right, enough dropping defensive ends into coverage, enough blitzing guys from 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Let's make this really simple. Let's let these guys play fast. Let's let these guys have some fun out there. And I think that's part of what also has happened with this team. Fun. You just said it a second ago, John. You know, like it's more fun to just go rush the quarterback and to try and stop the run on your way there. This team has been missing that, it seems like, all season long. And I think that comes from the perfectionism of the head coach. I think that comes from the perfectionism of the quarterback, not allowing yourself to enjoy the good moments when they come, to celebrate in the victories when they come, makes it when those defeats and those setbacks happen, when the standard is so high you can't possibly meet it, then you just give up. You get frustrated. And I think that all is encompassing in what we're seeing now, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
All right, Johnny, I do want to jump back over to the offense, because the Eagles are facing something this week that I hope that they've got an answer for, and that's a blitzing squad. They've been terrible against the blitz all year. I know Jalen hasn't been sacked much yet of late, but he's always getting flushed out of the pocket. He almost always goes to the right. And altogether, too often, it either ends up with him throwing the ball out of bounds and or sitting down for a sack 2 or 3 yards from the line of scrimmage. So they've been really poor at it. And certainly Brian Johnson was asked about it yesterday, and he gave the answer I expected, which was nothing. If he does have an answer, you're not going to tell the world about it in a news gathering on a Wednesday before the game. But so I'm going to ask you to speculate here. Mm-hmm. You think they got any answer for the blitz? Because Tampa's coming. There's no way Tampa's not coming. Right. They've got 14 different guys with sacks on their team. They come from every angle and different. And I don't know if that would Fletcher Cox would consider that fun. Probably not for him. But for the other guys who are coming from all the different areas, how are they going to handle the blitz, John?
Well, we've got to give the Eagles offensive coaching staff a little bit of grace here, because the blitz was only invented a couple of weeks ago. So you can't expect them to be ready for it this quickly. It is mind-boggling that they don't have more hot reads kind of factored in. That I don't know if Jalen Hurts is allowed to audibilize into these different. He's
allowed to audibilize at the end of games. We know that.
Yeah,
now.
That's right, and that's right. Yeah. And I think Jalen Hurts' mentality is we're going to beat the blitz by going over the top, right, for a big play. And instead of looking at Dallas and saying, "Hey, listen, 4 yards and turn around. I'm going to get this ball out." Like, there just has to be, and you would expect with them having played for 3 years together now, that there would be some kind of there would be some kind of
Sander, bring him. Yeah, try to bring him back.
He's going to try and reconnect with John.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up those numbers. Damo put them up there yesterday. The star quarterbacks against the blitz this year, the best quarterbacks, your guy Brock Purdy, 123.3 passer rating against the blitz. Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud, who's a rookie, Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson is going to be the MVP, all over 100 passer rating. Jalen Hurts at 80.5. My question, and we got John back, and I'll let you go, but I'll add in the fact, how much of it is coaching versus the quarterback? At some point, we got to look at the quarterback as well as the coaching.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys. Yeah, and that's one of the points that I was going to get to, is that I think this is on Jalen Hurts and the players as much as it is on the coaching staff. A quarterback, especially against the Giants last week, when they weren't hiding things, it was clear where the blitzes were coming from.
Wink Martindale. Everybody knows it's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
Right. So just, I mean, there are a couple of plays where, you can't have as Jalen Hurts has to see that this is coming, and he has to alert his guys to do something different and get the ball out quickly. You can't throw 30 yards down the field every time a team is going to blitz you. And one of the other things that Jalen Hurts can do, and sometimes this is possible, sometimes it's not, is last year when he would get blitzed, one of the ways he got out of it was by making a big play with his legs. We just haven't seen that kind of dynamic. I keep coming back to this because I don't think it's talked about enough. If you watch highlights from him running the football last year, you see a more dynamic runner than what you've seen this year. He's more of a straight ahead runner this year, as opposed to last year where he could kind of move around in the pocket, make guys miss and get upfield. And it's a backbreaker when a quarterback runs for 25 yards when you blitz, and that stops teams from blitzing. So that aspect of beating the blitz isn't there. Teams may have figured that out a little bit, and the Eagles have not adjusted with more hot routes and Jalen Hurts and his teammates who've been playing together for 3 years now. This should almost be symbiotic. This should not be complicated. There should be a look. A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts making eye contact, it's almost to the point where good offenses are able to do that and say, blitz is coming, you know what to do, and get the ball out quickly. They haven't done that. And maybe they can look back on week 3 and see how they handled the blitz in week 3 when they performed really well running the football. Maybe they can lean on that and beat the Buccaneers that way. That's kind of what you have to pin your hopes on.
John, let me follow up there, because I started voicing concerns about this in April. May at the latest, after Jalen had signed the big $250 million deal, that one of the big keys to the Eagles last year, what made the Eagles a Super Bowl team, was the +1 aspect of the Philadelphia Eagles, that Jalen Hurts could take off with his legs and make a play, get a first down, get a 25-yard play at almost any time.
Right.
And I said, I hope that continues. Nick Sirianni was on the record going, wait a minute, you think I'm going to ask him to give up his superpower when asked about it? Okay, glad to hear that, Coach. Appreciate that. You allayed my fears for about 10 minutes. And then the season started, and you could see he just wasn't running the football the way he did. And it's, I'm sure, a compilation of reasons. But Jalen decided he didn't want to run as much anymore. The organization decided, with a $250 million quarterback, we can't put him at risk as much as we used to. The offensive line has dropped off a little bit. I'll add in, he was hurt for part of the season. When he had the bad knee, you could just tell he's like limping out onto the field. But he started being less of a factor in the running game week 1 when he was completely healthy. If all those things contributed to what you just said is a missing link for the Philadelphia Eagles, what's the number one reason, do you think?
The only thing I can point to, well, there's a couple different things. I think maybe he is hurt more than we think. Maybe there's some of the explosiveness isn't there, and there's something we're going to find out after the season as a reason why.
Do we just accept that at face value?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if he undergoes like a minor surgery in the offseason on his knee, or if there's something we find out, like he was playing with a torn meniscus all year, where it affects his ability to move and stuff, fine. But we saw this with Donovan McNabb after his first couple of seasons, where he ran the football a lot and was a really dynamic runner. And then he just decided, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be a pocket passer. I want to play within the structure of the offense. And that's good. I think Jalen Hurts is a better passer than Donovan McNabb. So that can work to a degree, but you certainly do cut your legs off a little bit when you have this +1, you're not taking advantage of it. And I think, one of the other things that could be possible is, and I haven't heard this talked about a whole lot, this offseason, Jalen Hurts emerged as an NFL superstar. There were more demands on his time. There were more things going on his plate. It was a shorter offseason. And I just don't know that he came into the season in the kind of condition to be able to be a runner as he had the previous season. I just see a different level. He just looks a little slower. He doesn't look as explosive. And I don't have a hard and fast explanation for that, but I think those are some factors that could be a reason why.
I like that thought, John. I hadn't contemplated that. That's an interesting because he was week 1 but he didn't look the same before any of the potential injuries. By the way, torn meniscus. Darius Slay had a torn meniscus, which is astonishing. He's going to be back as quickly as he is, and now I'm starting to get concerned. Well, he might be back, but how effective he was going to be, but how effective is he going to be? But just to button up Jalen Hurts real quick. if you want to go positive, I'm going to light up my stogie with Chad Ochocinco. You know, he pretty much said consistently one of his goals was to get through and play in all 17 games for the first time.
Yeah.
And he did it. Maybe that was part of the scale back from the running perspective, and maybe he shows up in the playoffs and it's the old Jalen Hurts. Now, I just said week 1, he didn't look like the old Jalen Hurts. So, but if you want to be positive, any chance that's the case?
There's certainly a chance. There's certainly a chance he was saving himself for the playoffs. But I think at the same time, when you have a chance at the number 1 seed, I would have thought that was the time of year that he would have turned it on. Like when the 49ers and Cowboys come to town, that would have been like, I can understand saving yourself kind of for that part of the schedule, right? Makes sense. But it never happened. And so I just don't think it's there this year. I don't know why, but I'm not optimistic that he's suddenly going to flip a switch and turn it on. I mean, he may try and it might not be there. I don't know. It could be like a pitcher who just doesn't have his fastball for that particular year. You know, it might be down like a mile or an hour or two. Like that's kind of what this feels like in terms of Jalen Hurts' running ability. And perhaps there are things that defenses are doing schematically to prevent Jalen Hurts from being able to do what he did. But I just watch him run. You just watch highlights from last year, highlights to this year. It's a different guy running the football. I think he's a great passer, but he's just that element of his game is just not as dynamic this year. Straight ahead, great. He does have his speed, but I just think the mobility is not what it was.
It was more than a couple of weeks ago, but they did play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. And they did beat the snot out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. Was 25-3, and Tampa
25-11 scoregami game.
Right.
Yeah, never happened before.
And by the way, touchdown and 2-point conversion to make it a scoregami, as John points out. But it was complete and utter domination. They outgained them 2-1, more than 2-1, 400 and change to 190 and change, something like that. Has so much changed over it's still the same season. I know we're now in 2024, but it's still the 2023 season. And in the 2023 season, the Eagles went down to Tampa where they have to go again and just decimated the Bucs. What's the biggest reason why the Eagles have gone backwards? And we can't just look and go, it'll be 25-11 again. Scoregami again. Yeah, I'm going to predict the same exact score. Why aren't we?
Well, defensively, it still doesn't seem like they know what they're. I mean, they've allowed Tyrod Taylor, Drew Lock to beat them. They allowed an Arizona Cardinals offense that had Kyler Murray, but nothing else to destroy them. And you look at this Buccaneers offense; they've got 2 1,000-yard receivers. I don't like Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's a postseason quarterback, but he certainly. With the amount of open spaces and the lack of pressure that the Eagles are generating from their front 4 or front 5, depending on what it is they're doing, there's just too many open spaces that even a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, if he has time in the pocket, will be able to find his star wide receivers. And I just the way the Eagles, if they're going, the way they beat the Buccaneers the last time was they just ran the ball into oblivion. They ran over 40 times in that game, and they were able to keep the Buccaneers off the field. If the offensive line can have another performance like that, then then you could see a repeat performance of that. The problem has been if the offense for like a couple of series in the first half fails to generate any kind of scoring, the defense is offering no resistance early in games, and before you know it, it's 21-3. So you can't run the ball 40 times at that point, and now you're behind the 8 ball. So that's going to be the key is for this offense to score early and often, score early touchdowns often, because I just don't know how this defense is going to be able to pick themselves up off the mat and prevent this Tampa Bay offense from putting more points on the board than they did back in week 3.
At John Stolnis, make sure you follow John on X, Twitter, Bleeding Green Nation. Eye on the Enemy podcast does a tremendous job. I'll talk about that defense and talk about this game coming up, John, because I've already foreshadowed. I'm picking the Eagles to win this game. It has more to do with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers than the Philadelphia Eagles. I just don't think Tampa Bay is a very good football team. So my point, we go full circle back to the not having fun when they were 10-1.
Yeah.
If they go out there and dominate similar to week 3, maybe it's not a scoregami game, but they win by 2 touchdowns, easy, coast to victory, is it even meaningful? Because ultimately, you talk about that defense, and we know who's on the horizon. Even
Yeah.
if you get upsets other way, it's going to be San Francisco, Dallas, Detroit, offense, offense, offense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get behind the 8 ball. So even if they win a game in Tampa, impressively, is there going to be any positivity in Philadelphia?
I think so. I think all you need is for this defense to play somewhat competently. It doesn't need to be a shutdown defense. So this offense is good enough to put up 30 to 35 points against any defense in the NFL. They really have that amount of talent on that side of the ball. And if they come out against Tampa's blitzing heavy defense and they have answers for the blitz this time, I think at least offensively, that gives you the confidence that you can win a potential shootout against one of the teams that you mentioned if they have to go on the road against Detroit, Dallas, or San Francisco. And if the defense can look competent against the Tampa Bay offense, no, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to do the same thing against those other offenses like you mentioned, but it at least gives you right now, this defense is the worst defense in the NFL. It's the worst Eagles defense I've ever seen. And I'm not sure I've ever seen an NFL defense play as poorly as this. Look, this disorganized, have no answers for any single thing whatsoever. If this defensive line can hit Baker Mayfield, like if they can figure it out, if they can find it, that's kind of a neutralizer. That's an equalizer that can help out the cornerbacks and the linebackers and the safeties. That's what really needs to happen if the Eagles are going to win this game. Those defensive edge rushers, those defensive tackles, if they can get in the backfield, disrupt, make plays, get a couple of turnovers, which we know they can do, then I think there is reason for optimism in the divisional round if you have to go on the road someplace. But I don't know that the odds are that high that that's what we're going to see on Monday night.
All right, I'm going to ask you about a small group of Eagle players. Actually, could get even smaller because Hassan Reddick is not at a great year. Yeah. He was injured to start. He got real hot in the middle. He slowed down again here at the end. And I don't think Hassan is happy with the season he had. But then there's Josh Sweat, who has completely disappeared for 2 months. We're talking 2 months now. Josh Sweat hasn't had a sack in 8 games.
Yeah.
Any chance the two highly thought of, highly proclaimed, highly paid edge players the Philadelphia Eagles have come up with a good game Sunday against Tampa?
Boy, they certainly can do it. Confidence for me is not high that they will do it. That's why I was advocating resting the starters last week against the Giants. Even I didn't really care what happened in the Dallas-Washington game. I thought it was more important for those, especially the defensive linemen, to get a week of rest. Basically, treat last week as a bye week, so that maybe you come into this game against Tampa fresh. If this does have to do with just not having their legs under them, they're tired, too many snaps and all that, I don't know that that's a viable excuse anyway. In this modern NFL, you don't see other teams that have had good defensive lines suddenly just lose it. But I think that part of the issue is maybe fatigue, and I don't know that maybe they got enough of a rest in the second half against the Giants last week that they'll be fresher. I don't have any confidence about any aspect of this Eagles team right now. So if you're asking me, do I think that they're going to suddenly find it against Tampa Bay on Monday night? My answer is probably not. What we've seen is what we're seeing over these last 6-7 weeks or so. But again, it's not a non-zero chance. There's certainly a chance. The pedigree of these guys, Josh Sweat is a guy who deserved the contract extension that he got. Hassan Reddick is a guy, if you'll stop dropping him into coverage 7 to 10 times a game and let him actually rush the quarterback, can get there. The concern is in the middle of the defensive line, more so with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. I just don't know what these young guys have left in the tank. They might have used everything up already, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's difficult with the playing time on the defensive line. But you know what? I look at the Aiden Hutchinsons of the world, the Max Crosbys of the world, Danielle Hunters of the world. They never leave the field, and they always have. They could play 2 games. I'm like, what is going on? What is going on? But Kirby Smart gets a lot of love, but there's something going on in Georgia. Those guys are not ready to play. A ton of snaps, and we've seen it with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis. Now, Jordan's gotten better. I think it's a little bit unfair. I think he's had a good season overall. Hopefully, Jalen Carter starts to improve. But, man, and it's veteran guys, too. Josh Sweat. Now, remember what happened to Josh Sweat early in his career when he was a high school player, 5-star recruit, maybe the best recruit in the country, and he had this catastrophic leg injury, made it all the way back, and the Eagles were very cognizant for years about his reps, and all of a sudden, it's like, all right, it's time to go, and maybe he's just hit the wall. Yeah, it's disappointing, though. It is disappointing.
He gets that big contract, and they expect more from him to do that. And they've had to decrease Brandon Graham's snaps as he's gotten older there too. And Nolan Smith was a guy that they drafted in the first round. And you're not expecting Nolan Smith to be a 7-sack guy in his rookie season, but he just hasn't played very much, and you haven't gotten much from him. He's shown flashes, but those Georgia guys, it just hasn't been. You were expecting more from the Georgia guys, and maybe we were expecting too much from these guys this early in their career, given the fact that they didn't play a ton of snaps in Georgia. They did a lot of rotating there as well. But the performance of the young defensive players, especially towards the front, has been disappointing in both their inability to stay on the field in Nakobe Dean and in seemingly hitting a wall here. And really, Jordan Davis didn't play very much last year. This has kind of been his first full season playing every week, regular snaps. And I imagine he hit a rookie wall as well.
Yeah, I didn't think it was going to be a 7-sack year for Nolan Smith, but I didn't think it was going to be a goose egg either. So, last one for me. And John, I'm going to let you choose which blank you want to fill in.
Okay.
The Philadelphia Eagles will beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and advance to the next round because blank. Or the conversation on Birds 365 and I on the Enemy podcast will change drastically next week because the Eagles are out of the playoffs because blank. Give me basically the way you're leaning and why.
I'll go with the second one, and I think we are all going to be. I don't see the Eagles winning on Monday night. And just full disclosure, I have picked the Eagles to win every single week this year. I kept thinking, early in the season, there was no reason not to pick them to win. And then as the season went along, I just kept thinking, all right, this is the week they pull out of it. All right, this is the week they pull out of it. And these last 2 weeks against the Cardinals and Giants have broken me. I can't in good conscience, after what I've seen over these last couple of weeks in particular, I can't get myself there to them going into Tampa, figuring things out and righting the ship. It is certainly possible that they do it. I just can't get there. And so I don't know how they're going to lose. If it's a blowout, if it looks like it did against the Cardinals and the Giants, what we're going to be talking about is the future of Nick Sirianni. Are we going back to the Doug Peterson days where entire offensive coaching, defensive coaching staffs are fired, outside voices brought in that don't mesh with what Nick Sirianni wants to do? Do they offer an ultimatum to Sirianni? Does he say yes? Does he say no? Where did it all go wrong? It's an offseason nobody wants to contemplate. Yeah, but I mean, I think...
you know what, John? I can't even see that path. And it has more to do with Tampa Bay. They had to win a game in Carolina, a 2-win team. Granted, it's on the road. Baker Mayfield threw for 137 yards. I'm with you. This defense is atrocious.
But, I mean, is Carolina's defense right now better than this Eagles defense? I'm not so sure it isn't.
It might be, but it's not that much better.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the worst team in football by a wide margin, the Carolina Panthers. Yeah, I just don't think I don't think Tampa Bay has any bullets. So, they could win the game, but it's probably going to be 20-17. Eagles are going to turn it over a bunch. I can see that happening, but I don't see this Giants-like performance. Like the Giants, to me, I really do plush that game. I know you got to go. I apologize. No, I really do plush that game simply because, and you can criticize them. They had no interest. They tried to do it judiciously. All right, we're going to protect certain guys, but certain guys have to play. And it just came out as like, what are we doing? And the guys didn't show up. So from that standpoint, not saying it's a good thing, but I do think it's a game you look at and say, it's not really that relevant. And I think people are caught up in it.
Here's the reason why I might be siding with John and leaning toward the Bucs. They have won 5 of their last 6 games. All right. Yeah, they only beat the Panthers 9-0 in their final game, which, oh, by the way, was a W, something that the Eagles have been few and far between grabbing. they did win 5 of their last 6, and beating Green Bay in December is not a bad win. So, Johnny Stolnis, you know, we love whenever you come on and join us on the show. Appreciate your podcast. Appreciate the work you do at BLG. Thank you much for jumping in with us today, and we'll have you on again, hopefully to talk about another Eagle game, maybe to talk about the offseason. We're going to have to wait and see how it plays itself out. John, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
That's John Stolnis, Bleeding Green Nation, and the Eye on the Enemy podcast. He's McBone. I'm McDonald. Still got plenty to do. Full hour to go here on Birds 365. And Birds fans, here's your chance to save up to 40% on your car insurance right now from one of JAKIB Sports' great partners. Here's what we got to do. Call managing partners Jim or Fran and tell them you're a friend of JAKIB Sports and Birds 365.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!